being a skeptic and a pastor, it took me a while to understand that this weird personality quirk in me that felt at odds with my profession was actually a superpower.
That is Jeremy Steele. He is a deep skeptic, but also a pastor. He runs an online community with hundreds and thousands of folks who are wanting to deepen their spiritual lives, but don't feel necessarily comfortable walking into that building. Y'all know what I'm talking about. He recently wrote a book, Rituals for Heretics. And in this conversation, we talk about the power of rituals, not just from a spiritual standpoint, but also a psychological one, and why he gets excited being called a heretic.
I'm actually a certified heretic by the commenters on social media, actually every day.
What has made you a heretic in this world?
This is Unconventional leader Jeremy Steele.
We're just going to dive in.
Yeah, let's go.
Why ritual?
This is great. So, ritual is something that is like ancient, right? And for millennia, humans have been meeting their deep psychological need with religious rituals and meditation practices. Mm-hmm. And because it's been going on for millennia, like it's been being honed. The things that worked best, that connected the best, those kept going. And the things that sucked and didn't do anything, people just stopped doing because it didn't do it for them. And there's really fascinating psychological research that confirms that all of these different rituals do different things psychologically, things that therapists practice, right? Things that are fascinating. So each of the chapters in the book, it has a little bit about the ritual or the meditation practice, and then it's got the psychological research. Like, here's what's happening in your brain, right? And yeah, so the idea is that when people lose touch with religion, either they don't believe in God, or they're not sure, they've been traumatized, they don't engage in religious rituals. And so when that happens, you lose out on this huge mass of human knowledge. And so I wrote this book, Rituals for Heretics, where basically I went through a bunch of different world religions and took the rituals that they practiced, took the God part out, and left the method and the psychological work that's being done in it, so that people can put whatever they believe or don't believe about God in it and still experience the psychological benefit.
And why was this important for you personally to tackle?
Well, personally, my day-to-day, my persona online is the skeptic pastor. And what that means day-to-day for me is that I work with people who are deeply harmed by religion, that have a lot of religious trauma. I have a way that anybody in the world can click the link in my profile, TM, and schedule one-on-one time with me. And I think it was between October and January, I had 50 of those one-on-one conversations. And those people, those conversations are, like, if you can imagine where you have to be in order to reach out to an online pastor, it's often very intense things, right? It's like the hardest kind of pastoral conversations that you have in an average brick and mortar church. And what I found in talking to those people is that, yeah, a lot of them weren't sure what they believe. A lot of them had become agnostic or atheist, or just threw up their hands and said, I don't know, I'm not dealing with this anymore. But all of those people who used to be involved in religion and no longer are, which is like 70% of the people who classify themselves as non-religious, they have this experience of loss, right? There were things that were wonderful and helpful and healthy to them. And so as I worked with them, a lot of them wanted to meditate, or a lot of them wanted to have a sense of processing whatever it was. And so I began to work with these people and offer adaptations of religious rituals that I was familiar with to help them with that, and meditation practices. I spent a little bit of time in Silicon Valley and got some really beautiful meditation training out there. But yeah, and it was so life-giving. And then I started, mentioning that I had this idea for a book called Rituals for Heretics. And every time I said it, people were like, oh, I need that, right? Yeah.
It's funny because before you and I even met last year or whenever it was, I have said countless times that the thing that I long for and miss so much in my life is ritual. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I didn't have that anymore. So this was really, I'm so glad you wrote this book. And I would, play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Because it's something that's gone through my mind too. It's like if we remove kind of the spiritual element or the religious element or the belief element or whatever, does ritual lose its power? And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. So this is what was really fascinating in doing the psychological background research to a lot of this. Because it turns out that there's a ritual that is in some form in a bunch of different religions called smudging, where you can find it in First Nations religious traditions, and hoodoo and voodoo, and just all kinds of places. But like you get like sage, and you burn it, and the smoke is about cleansing the space. And so there's this ritual in here that that I label as living in a space that holds pain. And so, in a religious, the sort of religious framework, depending on specifically which religion you're coming from, it's like spirits or negative energy that, because something painful happened in a space, it's sort of lodged in that space. And the religious way of thinking about it is the ritual and the smoke clears that evil spirit or that negative energy or whatever. So the ritual starts. You start at the threshold, and you say, the smoke carries away what no longer belongs here. And then you move slowly through the space, like wafting the smoke with your hand, and you spend extra time in places that hold difficult memories. And you say things like, this sadness doesn't belong to me anymore, or I release the fear I carried in this room, right? And you go all the way around, and then you end up at the threshold again, and you go back through the space, naming and trying to internalize like intentions for those rooms that are what you want. Like this room, let this room hold softness. Let this kitchen feed joy. And you go back around, and then you end up at the threshold again, and you say, let the new begin. And you actually open up the windows in this ritual and allow the smoke to leave, and you just sort of envision the bad things leaving, and then you close them and you imagine the smoke bringing the good things. So, what's really interesting psychologically is that the psychological research confirms that that symbolic physical gestures, especially those inviting movement and scent, like multisensory focus, they can create real changes in the way memories are encoded and recalled. So traumatic memories are often encoded and sort of stuck in the emotion side of the brain. But smell is like particularly powerful because it's deeply tied to memory through something called the olfactory bulb, which connects directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are the centers of emotional memory. And so while you do this, what actually happens as you go through this is it helps move those memories from the emotion side to the logical memory storage side, and it helps to process it. It's the same kind of thing that is the goal in EMDR therapy for PTSD people, and yeah. So like, if you are a spiritual person, imagining the Holy Spirit and the power of God or whatever it is, the energy of the universe being present in that, that is a beautiful way to understand what's happening. But even if you don't, it's a powerful ritual. And so while I think that religion plays a role, your own personal experience of God and spirituality or the universe or whatever can do wonderful things. And I would say that the people who believe that would say that God is using this in my life. It doesn't mean that it's not helpful for everybody. But if you require some sort of belief in dogma in order to engage in the ritual, if it's encoded that way, then it means that people who don't believe in that specific religion or in that specific idea lose access to this powerful ritual.
Now, heretic is a strong word.
Yes, I'm actually a certified heretic. I've been certified by the commenters on social media, actually every day, every single day.
What has made you a heretic in this world?
I mean, they would say I'm a heretic because, usually basically it's because I don't believe like them, because I'm not some sort of fundamentalist evangelical. And I think that that I have, and I encourage people to have a sense of play about spirituality, to not be afraid. And I validate people's experience of the divine wherever that happens for them. Because I am trained in and a practitioner of Christianity. And I know that a lot of people have been deeply traumatized by the church. And a lot of my conversations with people start with, I am never going back to church. Don't try to get me to go back to church. And that's the church's fault. It's Christians' fault, right? And my personal belief is, if God exists, if it is the God that Christians worship, and if Christians are responsible for people not being able to engage with that God through their stream, but they still want to engage with God, I think God could give a damn about how they approach that, right? Yeah. And but that is heretical in some ways, right? When in some streams, and so, and I'm totally okay with that. In fact, there's part of me that is proud of that, because I feel like that aspect of who I am and how I operate in the world actually helps people try to connect with God who otherwise would not.
Owning that word, that label outside. I mean, obviously this is called unconventional leaders. Those are my
Right.
people. Reclaiming what separates you from other people as your competitive advantage or
Right.
something that doesn't disqualify you and so forth. It makes a cute bumper sticker and motivational
Right.
quotes, but actually living through it and walking through it, especially when you find yourself with no community. Probably, I've walked through this, just a complete
Yeah.
deep fear of what if I'm wrong? What if I got this wrong? And just that isolation, like kind of re-owning that word to where you can write a book called, Rituals for Heretics and be proud of it, like,
Yeah.
I'm a heretic, and just really own that. I'm curious kind of your experience getting to that point, because most people who listen to this show feel like the outsider, the outcast, the misfit. They've
Yeah.
walked away from everything that they know. And I believe that's our differentiating factor and our gift.
Yeah.
But it takes some work to get to that point. And I'm curious your experience with that.
Yeah, like I think that within reason, morally and ethically, oftentimes the thing that is different about you that bothers other people is your superpower. And oftentimes my experience is that it is something that on the face of it seems like a non sequitur. It seems like a pairing that doesn't make sense. Like, for example, Steve Jobs. By the way, I'm an Apple fanboy. Part of my personality is being a skeptic. The other part is being a fanboy. At any given time, there is something that I am fanboying about. Currently, Troye Sivan, Chapel Roan, a bunch of things. But I am a super Apple fanboy. I've read every Steve Jobs biography that's ever been published, multiple of them twice. But Steve Jobs, for all of his faults, he was a complete asshole. But he considered himself an artist and a technologist, right? And those things do not seem to go together. And those are things that bothered people about him, that people would, very early in his career, would see as his fault, right? He said that the inside of the computer was as important as the outside. Right, he had circuit boards change the engineers changed the patterns so that they were attractive, right? And early on, before he was able to harness that, it was his fault. It was what made him fail and ultimately get ousted as the Apple CEO. Like, he had a factory with robots that he changed the paint on 7 different times in order to get the color right for the robots in the factory, right? That's not harnessing that, right? And so for me, being a skeptic and a pastor, it took me a while to understand that this weird personality quirk in me, that felt at odds with my profession, was actually a superpower. Right? Early on in my career, it was a competing force. It caused me to make bad decisions. I would go too far on one side. I'd feel guilty about being a skeptic. I wouldn't want to talk about it. I would act like I was more sure about things than I wasn't. And then that would feel like morally compromising to me. I wasn't living into who I was, and I was acting like something that I wasn't. And then I'd sort of swing back the other way. But eventually I was able to allow that cognitive dissonance between skeptic and pastor to make friends with it.
Yeah.
And to see it as to see them more as dance partners than as competitors on a field.
Amen. Amen. My belief right now, let's say right now, because it's ever evolving,
It should always, if it's not evolving,
Come
you
on.
are not seriously engaging.
Preaching, pastor. Come on. Right now, where I'm at with the differentiating factor, the outsider thing, is I'm really returning to this idea of like wholeness and the collective whole. And whenever we see something that's different than us, we revolt against it without understanding that is an aspect of us and a part of us. And since it's different, maybe it's not a part we want to accept in ourselves.
Right.
And so, yes, it is an individual thing of like, you're different than me and that's beautiful and we're all unique, but we're all actually exactly the same. And you're reflecting to me something about myself because
Right.
you're a part of the whole, just like I'm a part of the whole. And I think that's the hard part for all of us to accept is even our enemy, even the person in opposition to us, even the person who's different than us, there's an aspect of their humanity that is all of our humanity. And we don't like that because we want to create all these different lines. And that's why I love people like you who are creating spaces for people who feel like there's something wrong with them. And you're saying, no, you have a place here and you add to this story, our human story. And there's something for us to learn from you. And you have a community with a whole bunch of different people, not church, I believe is what it's called, but it's a variety of beliefs and religions. And before we move back into ritual, because I have some more questions about that, I want to stay here with this idea of heretic. If I may call your community a group of heretics themselves.
They would own that. Yeah.
Good. What have you learned about that community, the people who are kind of the outcasts from the church that maybe has surprised you or taken you a while to learn?
Well, I think, so one of the things, you mentioned this like, human reaction against something that is different, right?
Yeah.
And when you engage in that in a healthy way, it can help you grow. But there is an unhealthy tendency within humans once we begin to create communities, is to follow the negative impulse or the negative side of that reaction and create a group that we would label as the other, right? And what that does is it actually will create group cohesion, right? In interpersonal and group communication theory, that othering is one of the tools that you can use to create a deeper bond. The problem is when you do that, you are limiting the voices that are engaging with your community, and there's a compromise there. So one of the things that this not church group has is it sort of has as its core value this posture of learning and exploration, right? That when I engage with you, even if I completely disagree with you, I am going to learn something about myself. I am generally going to be changed, and I might discover something in your beliefs that had I not had that learning posture, I wouldn't have gotten to include in my own life, right? We've had a Satanist join the group, and when they originally posted, there are people in there that are Christians, and one of them was like, you used this word to describe your practice, and I don't know what that means. Could you tell me more? And they explained it, and then the person was like, oh my gosh, I have needed that word. Like that explains something that I haven't had a term for. And the idea that a Christian can learn from a Satanist, right? And be in a community, right? That is
Wild.
that is creating cohesion around learning and acceptance instead of around othering.
It's interesting being, I feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, kind of one foot in the spiritual healing world and the other foot in the digital marketing entrepreneurial space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
That describes my life to a T.
it feels so conflicting, and I wrestle with this so much because my values and my belief system is that I just mentioned it, that separation is really what, the biggest wound of this world right now. And as communicators, people who are called by God, really believe that collective healing is really just this return back to wholeness and oneness. And as hippy dippy as that sounds, it's actually some hard ass work, but it's actually counter to what we're taught as communicators and digital creators, which is just what you said. In order to build community, you need to other. In order to build strong brands, you have to be controversial. You need to be able to say, if you're for everybody, you're not for anybody, and that whole deal, which is so true. It is so true. And it's interesting thinking about getting your message out there and being effective and reaching more people, but also to not adding to the collective brokenness and division that we have right now. And I know I'm getting a little off topic, but while we're here, and then we'll get back, I promise. I'm curious, your take on that and how, as a communicator, you wrestle with it.
No, I very early on in building this content and doing this work, really struggled with that specific thing because a lot of my content is pushing back on evangelicalism and fundamentalism and Christian nationalism. And there is a way to read what I'm doing as actually othering them, right? And so that was a sort of existential crisis for me. But what I came to is I am not pushing back on them as people or as a group. What I'm actually pushing back on is this narrowing, hateful exclusion. And I'm arguing for openness and inclusion, right? And the problem isn't that you believe that you can have a personal relationship with God, or that you can say this 4-sentence prayer and be saved. The problem is that you are creating an in and an out, and the only way that you get in is by ascribing to these very specific beliefs and saying this very specific prayer. Right? That approach is othering. Saying that people can have a relationship with God, great. Personal relationship with God, great. That they can experience salvation, wonderful. But it's the method. And so what my focus is that is I want to push back against those things so that people who have experienced that exclusion and harm can realize that that's not the only way, right? Because a lot of the people that I work with live in very monoculture areas where their entire world, right? Their family, their friends, their soccer league for their kids is filled with people that have this one very harmful belief. And when they start to move out or question that, they're faced with social isolation. And so a lot of people aren't ever even exposed to the idea that there is something else. And then if they are, it can be risky, and they need places to continue to learn and hear those, and really communities like Not Church to journey with other people. I'm contractually required to use the word journey at least once as an online influencer. Yeah. So that was a real thing that I had to process, because I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. With ritual, I had written down here, where's the line when ritual is healthy versus ritual as bondage? Back to the religious fundamentalism stuff. An example of this is we visited Rome last year. We went to this Franciscan monk, fascinating place where they had like these rituals where they would like beat themselves, and like, there were these tools that, just this suffering thing. And it was like this ritual of like kind of surrendering themselves to the Lord and all of that. And I think the fear of coming out of religion, I know for me, has been allowing, even though I miss ritual and I know the sacredness of it, I'm also kind of afraid of it still, because it was used as a weapon of harm at times. And figuring out kind of like the line between being ritualistic and fundamental, I'm trying to say, and using it as a tool of connection and mental health and so forth. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I think, at least my take is that it becomes unhealthy when it is a tool of control, right? When ritual is combined with power, that's when it becomes really problematic. Because now it's psychological manipulation, right? This is a tool that does really good things for you brain-wise, but now when you are tying that really good brain stuff to control and power and unhealthy theology, community, whatever, then it becomes a tool for manipulation. But the other thing is that I find that taking a ritual that caused harm and experiencing it in this heretical way can be really powerful for people. So probably the most heretical thing I did was I adapted the ritual of communion. So this would be one of the things that could make me lose my job as a pastor, but go big or go home. So in the Christian theology, communion is really about connection, in this just extreme mystical sense. The idea is that through the death and resurrection of Jesus and the participation in some way, depending on which stream you are in that sacrifice through food, it doesn't just connect you to Jesus, it connects you to all of the Christians who ever have been and all of the Christians who ever will be, right? It is that all of the Christian people are connected to each other through Jesus. And that connection is part of what holds us accountable to being the best version of ourselves, or the theological way of saying it is repenting of our sins. And so there's this form of communion, these movements where it's sort of this open welcome. There is a confession of sin, and there is this ritual of connection. And so what I do in the book is I spent some time trying to figure out, like, what is at the core of this, and what is going on psychologically and mystically. And what I realized is that the food aspect is the center, and the food aspect is really the key to connection, right? Because we will all die someday, and eventually we will turn into dirt. Our molecules will become part of the earth, and from that dirt, plants will grow, some of which we will eat, some of which animals that we may choose to eat will eat, and that will become part of that. Then we will eat them, and those molecules will become part of our bodies that will then one day return to the earth. And so through food, we are connected to all the people and all the animals and all the plants. And when you are part of this bigger system, that requires something of you, right? To use your life to move all of that in a positive direction. And so the ritual is focused on that. And there is a moment of reflecting on the ways that I have not been the best version of myself, and trying to let go of that and commit to that, and then consuming food and drink and reminding ourselves that we are connected to everything. Mm-hmm. So I did this in a live stream online, and I have a friend who is a pagan high priest and grew up in Christianity, and he happened to be on the live stream, and he texted me later, and we had a long conversation about how he really needed that, right? Because that was something that was meaningful and then harmful, and finding a way to reclaim the power of that without engaging in the blood or the Jesus words or any of that was really healing for him and really, really powerful for him.
I don't know if this was just my exposure to Christianity or if this is true or not, because I know you mentioned earlier, and I actually had a question about that, about, the different religious practices he pulled from, because it wasn't just Christianity, there's Judaism and, a variety of others.
Right.
But I've actually
Buddhism, Hinduism, Wicca,
yeah.
All kinds.
Again, this could just be the brand that I was given growing up in Arkansas. But
right.
I've told Brant, my husband, before, I'm like, I don't feel like I grew up with a lot of ritual in Christianity. I've been kind of jealous learning about other religions. Specifically, the Jewish community. I have a lot of friends who are Jewish, and they have so many feasts and rituals and candles and all this stuff. And I grew up in the non-denominational evangelical, like, we're free from bondage and all that, which is just complete BS. But there was also not ritual there. I mean, we had communion, but besides the church service, which was pretty predictable of how it would work, there wasn't a lot of sacredness and personal ritual. And you mentioned the earth a moment ago and our connection to that. And I'm curious if that was just me or if you experienced that too. Is Christianity kind of dry of ritual or what?
I think it's which stream of Christianity that you're in. So that was something that I discovered, I'd say in my early 20s. So I was like you. I grew up in a stream of Christianity that we really had baptism, we had communion, right? Baptism. And then I started to discover that there are streams of Christianity that are full of ritual. So Episcopals and Catholics and Orthodox, for example, on Maundy Thursday, there's a ritual of staying up all night in prayer because the disciples fell asleep, and this is this act of repentance on behalf of humanity. In the Orthodox Church, they have those really weird looking paintings, the icons, but there is a ritual of icon gazing with this idea that the icons are not just paintings, but they are actually windows into another reality. And then there is the Stations of the Cross. There are in Catholicism, you have all the different rites. So confession, the last, I forgot, the last rites, right before you die, baptism, confirmation, communion. Like there's a bunch of them. And so I think that for me, when I started to discover these things, I was like, oh, cool. Like I had a Catholic girlfriend at one point, and I went to her church and I was like, whoa, this is really weird. This is cool. And then there was a moment in Christianity where there was this movement called the emerging church. And a lot of that was exposing these rituals, from monastic traditions, from things like the Orthodox traditions, and that's when I really first discovered, oh wow, like there's something called the Ignatian Examen, there's something called centering prayer, there's like all of these beautiful things that we just didn't have. Like we had the sanitized version that was much more focused on emotionalism, emotional experience, and personal, like very Americanized, like it's all about the individual and the individual experience. Yeah.
This is kind of, I feel like, a very simple question, but I think it's important to decipher between the two. Like, what crosses something over from like a tradition into a ritual? And here's a silly example. Like, I don't know where this came from, but every Thanksgiving morning, I make blueberry muffins. I do that every Thanksgiving. And guess what? I'm the only person in my family who eats them. I'll make them and I'll eat them. Like,
I love this.
I don't know why I do that, but I have to have blueberry muffins on Thanksgiving and watch the Macy's Day. So that, to me, I've always said that's my tradition. And I'm guessing like ritual is just really about intention, or does it have to be a spiritual element? But how would you decipher between those two?
Yeah, I mean, I think that traditions can be rituals, right? And I think the difference is intention, right? Am I doing this with the intention of something specific, right? So, one of the rituals in the book, it's about trying to grow things in your life. Right. And you take a moment to like write out, to meditate on for a second and write out some intentions for your life. And then you take that piece of writing and you plant it, you put it either in a potted plant or you dig a little hole under a plant, like you're planting a seed. And then whenever you are caring for that plant, watering it, trimming it, whatever, you are doing that with the intention of this reminding yourself that growing those things takes care, right? And just like I've got to water a plant, or I've got to pull the dead blossoms off, I've got to do that kind of work within myself. And so a lot of people have this ritual around caring for their plants. Like they come home, they do this thing, they go and they spend time in their garden, right? That can be a tradition, it can be a habit. And then if you do it with intention, it can be a ritual as well.
Were you nervous publishing this?
No. That's this is the first time I've ever thought of that. Because like maybe 5 years ago, I would have been nervous, but I have exposed myself for a complete heretic on a daily basis, really, for years now. And anybody who was going to leave me or be pissed and not talk to me anymore, any professional thing that might be a consequence, if it's a consequence at this point, it doesn't make any sense, because there's nothing in this book that I haven't said way worse than online. And in fact, like I've got a grant for this work that so I'm ordained in the United Methodist Church, and this stuff was just blowing up all on its own, and it was taking up more and more of my time. And so, but it was ministry. And eventually somebody encouraged me to get this grant, this normally for new church starts. And I was like, this does not in any way fit the mold. Like, I had to fill out this form where it was like, how many schools are within a 5-mile radius of your location? And I was like, none? All? Like, I don't know. Like, it made no sense. And so I respect this person, and so I was doing the thing, but I was sure I was not going to get this grant. And so I went in and I was like, look, none of these people are going to church. Many of them are not going to ever use the Jesus words, and they are all asking for a pastor, and I think they deserve one. But I'm not going to do more harm to them by forcing them into one thing or another. And I don't know if there was like a gas leak in the room or what, but they were like, yeah, go for it. We think that we have been part of a harmful system, and we think they deserve a pastor too. So here's money. And I get basically 4 years. You get 100% funding the first year, 75%, 50%. And so like I have to get enough money to become self-sustaining in 4 years. And I told them I'm not going to accept donations. So because that's part of the traumatic system, manipulating people out of money. So yeah, it's an adventure. We've made it through year one. We're still going to be, it looks like we'll be in the black for year two. We'll see what happens.
I have a final question for you, but first, the book. I love that it's laid out in a way where you can read it from the beginning to the end, but you can also flip through it and find something that you're walking through right now and find a ritual for it. So you have rituals and meditations for that. And so it's a really good like handbook of like, I'm going through a transition. I feel stuck. You know, what are some ideas and maybe some practices that I've never heard of before. So it's brilliant. It'll be linked in the show notes. Please, y'all, buy it. You will enjoy it, I promise you. But I also want to just thank you overall for your work beyond the book, because there's so many hurting people who feel alone and feel isolated, and you are really doing the work of a real pastor, of creating a safe place for folks. And it is so cool for you to challenge every stinking norm, all the way from like who you welcome in, all the way to the container in which you hold a space. Because that's one thing my friends and I have been talking a lot about, is even the container of church is so triggering for people. And you have a Discord community and you have Zoom calls, and you create a space that's unlike anything else. And you're just doing incredible work, and it's just a gift and an honor to know you. Is there anything else you want to point people to outside? We'll have Not Church linked up and Rituals for Heretics. Anything else that I missed there?
No, I've got a podcast, Unbelief. I interview interesting people, and I sometimes talk for 30 or 45 minutes about something like why the Bible doesn't say that homosexuality is wrong, or the psychology. I did a long podcast, the psychology that is behind brainwashing and how that happens in Christianity. So yeah, Unbelief is a cool place.
People love
right? It's like either you love me or you are happy that I'm going to burn in hell.
I shouldn't be laughing at that, but it's true. It's true. I come from that world.
Either you got to laugh or cry, right? Like
I know it. Listen, I got a final question for you. I want to tell you what I heard today and what I got out of this, and ask you what I missed, or what is something maybe you wanted to express that maybe I didn't ask you. So for me, this book, this new season of your life, you're inviting people to return back to practices that have mental health benefits. A ritual has mental health benefits. And when we lose our community, our religion, we step away from everything. We lose that sense of not only kind of connection to divine through these rituals, but also too just that whether you believe in divine spirit or not, just the practice of going through a ritual, there's mental health benefits to that. And so what you've done is you've created a log for people to be able to flip through and find something that connects with what they're going through right now, and engage in ritual once again, specifically the heretic community, which I freaking love. What is something about all of that that I didn't think to ask you that you think is really important for unconventional leaders to understand?
I think that, so one of the things about the layout of the book is after each ritual, there's a whole page that is how to make it yours, right? To change it, cross stuff out, write your own words in there, and I think that is something that as leaders we can get overly serious about things, right? About rituals is perfect example of that. But what I'm hoping is that this book also invites a sense of play and permission to iterate and to try new things and to say, this doesn't work for me, X it out. Let me see if there's something I can create in there. And I think for me, that's really the core of innovation, right? So I was trained when I was in Silicon Valley in human-centered design thinking. And the key to that really is play. It is trying things, getting the data, and constantly iterating. But not in this anxious, oh my gosh, this failed. How do I change it? But this failed. What does that prompt me to try? And when you can create a culture, a sense of play, that brings out the imagination that can spark the ideas that will solve the problems, ideas that wouldn't be sparked if everything was too serious, right? Words of Heath Ledger's Joker, why so serious?
The Skeptic Pastor, y'all. Thank you so much for your time, Jeremy. This is great.